Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of Positively Negative. Today I've got a little point and shoot camera to show off and to talk about. It's called the Minolta Memory Maker. Now this was my grandmother's camera and she took it on holidays all around the world, and I think that's really what this camera was designed to do, was to be your companion on trips and on family gatherings, particularly for people who perhaps don't know much about photography, who really just wanted to point the camera in the direction of the subject, push the button, and then get a nice picture. So it's a cute little camera with one particularly nice feature that we'll get to shortly. But before we get to that, let's just have a look at the camera itself and look at the features that it's got. So starting at the top of the camera, on the left-hand side, you'll see the film rewind lever. So that just pops out and then you can rewind your film once you've finished your roll. To the right of that is your frame counter window, so you can see how many shots you've taken, and then obviously you can figure out how many shots you've got left on the roll. And then to the right of that is the big red shutter release button, which obviously you press to take the photograph. On the back panel of the camera, you'll see at the bottom on the left a little window where you can see what film is in the camera. So if you put film in the camera through that little window, you can see, oh, it's Kodak color film, oh, it's whatever, so that you can see that without having to open the back of the camera and expose the film to light, obviously. Just above that and to the right, we have the viewfinder. So that's where you look through to compose your photograph. This camera's got a pretty small viewfinder. I've used point and shoot cameras that have got far bigger viewfinders, but it does the job. And then to the right of that, you'll see your film winder, which you operate with your thumb, and that winds your film onto the next shot after you've taken a photograph, and it also cocks the shutter, allowing you to take the photograph. Okay, that's important to know. And then directly to the right of that is obviously the strap that you can, the wrist strap to carry around on your wrist. At the bottom of the camera, you'll see on the left-hand side is the button that you must press to rewind your film. So before you can rewind your film, you have to press that button to release the spool so that you can rewind it back into the canister. So you press that button in when you've gotten to the end of the roll and you want to roll it back into the canister. And then on the opposite side, you've got your battery compartment. The camera just takes two standard AA batteries, and those power the light meter and the flash. So on the front of the camera, the most obvious feature is the panel that covers the lens and protects the lens. So to reveal the lens, we have to slide that panel away. And behind it, you'll see a 35mm glass lens. So this lens, there's not a hell of a lot of information online about the specific details about this camera. It seems to be a sort of guess that it's a 35mm slightly wide angle lens, and all that means is that you're getting a slightly wide field of view. So perhaps not as wide as say a smartphone camera, but wider than a normal lens, and that means it's very good for things like group shots or street photography or things like that. It won't be good for close-ups, and we'll talk about the reason why soon. Just below the lens is the little switch that switches the flash on and off. Okay, now this is probably the best feature of this camera, is you can decide whether or not you want the flash to be on or off. Okay, now with a lot of point and shoot cameras of this sort of type, this sort of price point and this sort of build quality and all these things, the flash will come on automatically when the camera decides it must come on, right? Now imagine if you're in a place where you don't want your flash to go off. Perhaps you're at some venue, maybe it's, a classical music concert, and you don't want your flash to go off and disrupt the violin soloist. So sometimes there are reasons why you don't want the flash to go off. So it's wonderful that this camera allows you to switch it off when you believe that there is enough light in the scene, okay? The camera will still fire. Even if it believes the scene is too dark without the flash, it will still take the picture. So you're actually still in control of the machine. The machine's not in control of you, which I think is a wonderful feature. Directly above the lens, you'll see the other side of the viewfinder window, and directly to the right of that, you'll see your flash. Now in terms of a few more technical features of this camera, just below the flash on the front panel, you'll see the words focus free and DX auto. Okay, let's start with what focus free means. Focus free is not the same as autofocus, okay? This camera doesn't focus automatically. What it's doing is focusing at infinity and giving you enough depth of field that you don't need to worry about focus, okay? So in other words, everything from about 3 meters in front of you to infinity should be more or less in focus when you take a photograph, okay? There's no autofocus. So if you hold the camera really close to your face and you want to do a selfie like so, it's going to be blurry because the lens can't focus that close, okay? So remember, this camera is really designed for, like, imagine a group shot of a family, or for snaps as you're walking around a holiday destination and you're taking pictures of the scenery and stuff, okay? So that's an important thing to remember. You're not going to be able to do individual portraits with this camera because they will be out of focus. The next term, DX Auto. Now, DX Auto means that the camera can read the DX code on a film cartridge. Now, the DX code is a barcode that's printed on the film cartridge that tells the camera what ISO the film is, what sensitivity to light that film is. Okay? Now, this camera can read films of ISO 100, 200, and 400. Okay? That's all that this camera can read. So you can't put in ISO 3200 film or ISO 1600 film. This camera won't recognize that film and it will get the exposure incorrect. So you needn't worry too much, because the sort of film that you're going to be putting in this camera, your sort of, shall we call it entry-level color negative film, things like Kodak Color Plus, Fujifilm C200, Kodak Gold, that sort of stuff. Most of that film is in the ISO 200 to 400 range. So those films are wonderful. Those sort of ones that you can get over the counter at like a pharmacy or something, right? So if you put in one of those films, it'll work perfectly. Now, this camera is designed with a couple of safety features to make sure you don't waste film, but they might make you think that the camera is faulty when you first pick it up, okay? So the first thing to remember is that the camera won't let you take a photograph if the front panel is closed, okay? You can't press the red button down if the front panel is closed. You have to open that front panel and then you can press your shutter release. The other thing to remember is that the camera only winds on and it only cocks the shutter when there is film inside the camera. Okay, so if there's no film in the camera, you can wind this dial forever and ever, and it will never cock the shutter, and it will never let you take a test shot. See, nothing's happening, no pictures being taken. So if you find this camera at home and you're wondering if it's still working, what you have to do is open the back panel by flipping this little switch on the right-hand side, and then you'll see next to the take-up spool where you've thread your film in, there is a little gear that actually catches the film, right? That's the gear that's actually cocking your shutter. So what you can do is you can physically turn this gear yourself with your finger, like so. Turn it, turn it, turn it. There, did you hear it click? Okay, so now that it's clicked, now we can actually fire the shutter, listen. There we go, so the camera fired. So that little gear inside the camera body, your film spool, actually, the sprocket holes on the film actually catch that gear and actually wind that gear along. That's the gear that's actually cocking your shutter. That's winding up the spring that will allow your shutter to open and close. Okay, so if you want to test this camera to make sure that it's working, you don't need to put batteries in and you don't need to put film in. All you need to do is wind that little gear all the way until you hear a click and then fire the shutter. All right, so if you come across this camera at home and it's not working, it doesn't necessarily mean it's broken. It just means those safety features are stopping you from testing it correctly. Alright, because this Minolta Memory Maker is the sort of camera that might just be your very first 35mm film camera, I thought it might be a good idea to show you how to put film into the camera. Okay, it's very simple. So chances are you'll be getting a roll of film that looks something like this. Kodak Color Plus. So it's a nice cheap color negative film. It's actually a wonderful film. It's like much better than the price would have you believe. It gives very warm tones, very warm colors, and it's just the sort of thing you might put in this camera. Okay, so the film comes in a little box, right, and then in a little canister, which you should keep. They're very useful for storing things like screws and pills and things. Right, you open your canister up, and then the film itself looks like this. Remember we spoke about the DX code? So here's the DX code on the canister, that barcode that tells the camera how to expose the film. Okay, so this bit of film sticking out of the canister is called the leader, and we pull this out when we load our camera. Okay, so now what we have to do is we have to open the back panel of the camera with a switch on the side. Okay, Now, I'm going to try and do this where you can see it. So it's a bit tricky, but please bear with me if I look a bit clumsy. It's really not difficult to do, okay? The canister goes in upside down on this camera, right? So this bit that sticks out at the bottom should be at the bottom, okay? So you slide it in like so, and it fits in easily. So after you've put your canister in, you pull the leader out across to the other side of the compartment until it hooks onto a little tooth there of the gear at the bottom, okay? Now what you can do is you can wind on a little bit, right? And you feel that the camera has taken the film. You can feel it coming, right? There goes the film. And as soon as we've gotten to that point, we can close the back of the camera and then wind until we get to frame number 1 on our frame counter. There we go. The camera will stop us automatically when we get to frame number 1, and then we're ready to shoot. So it's as easy as that. These cameras are much easier to load than some older film cameras where you had to sort of thread the leader through like a little gap in the end. These ones are designed to be as easy as possible. Remember, if my grandmother could have done it, then you can do it too. Then when you're finished with the film, when you've shot all 36 or all 24 exposures, depending on which roll of film you put in the camera, you press the button at the bottom to wind the film back into the canister. And I normally hold that button in just in case, but you don't necessarily have to. And then you go to the rewind knob at the top left of the camera and you wind it clockwise until you can feel all the tension is gone. And then when you finish, your canister will look like this. It'll be, you've wound your film all the way back into the canister, and then you can send off the film to be developed. The most important thing to remember is obviously never to open the camera while your film is still loaded before you've wound the film all the way back into the canister, because then you're going to expose the film to light and you're going to have ruined all your photographs. So be careful, it's an expensive mistake. It's definitely one I made when I just started in film photography. So keep that in mind. Alright, now we're going to take a look at some pictures I've taken with the camera just to show you more or less what the lens is capable of. I've taken all of these photographs on black and white film because I basically only shoot black and white film, but of course if you put color film in the camera, you're going to get color photographs, okay? So don't think that you only get black and white photographs. I had that question on a previous video with another Minolta point and shoot camera. The color of the film depends on, the color of the photographs depends on the film that you put in the camera, okay? Now all these shots are going to be in black and white, but you'll see that they're not particularly sharp, they're not particularly well detailed or whatever. You can see the lens isn't exactly of the highest quality, but I think they actually have kind of a pleasing look to them. They're high contrast, so there's a huge difference between the lightest and the darkest parts of the scene. And also notice the focusing distance. You'll see on some of the shots the subject was a bit close, and so the subject is out of focus while the background is in focus. So that's something to consider when you are framing your photographs. Alright guys, well that about sums up this look at the Minolta Memory Maker. Now there were a few versions of this camera made. You might find the Memory Maker 2 or the Memory Maker 3, but they were minor revisions. I think they're largely the same camera, just with a slightly different shell. So I'm sure what was said here will apply to those cameras as well. And I really do think it's a good camera for somebody who's just starting out in film photography. You know, somebody who perhaps doesn't know all that much about exposure and manual settings and things like that, who's maybe coming from a smartphone and wants to try this old-fashioned film thing. I think it's a good camera for that, right? It just uses standard AA batteries, which are easy to find, and you can buy cheap color negative film for it, which is easy to find as well, right? Don't expect amazing picture quality, but you'll definitely get that film look out of this camera, and I think your friends and everybody will love the look of the photographs you take of them, right? So please, if you see one of these for sale, don't pay a lot of money for them. You know, there's a tendency these days for point and shoot cameras to be sold at ridiculously inflated prices. I've seen similar cameras to these being sold for like $150 US, which for me is just ridiculous. I wouldn't pay 100 Rand for this camera, so that's like $6, right? So really don't pay a lot of money for this camera. It's not worth a lot of money, okay? It's the sort of camera that if you find it lying around at home and it still works, then it's great. And if you find it at a thrift shop for a couple of dollars or whatever, then get it, it's great. But please, 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 I'm begging you, don't spend $200 on a camera like this, because all you're doing then is firstly wasting your own money, and secondly pushing the price of cameras up worldwide, okay? So that's my little public service announcement for you. So cool, happy shooting guys, and I'll see you next time.